Before we begin the episode, I would like to thank our sponsor, Physio Recovery Room, and their new Nordic Hamstring T-Bar. The bar facilitates Nordic exercises which help increase its strength and limit hamstring injuries. To find out more, visit physiorecoveryroom.ie or follow at physiorecoveryroom_shop over on Instagram. Welcome back to the Sideline Live podcast. You can follow us over on Twitter and Instagram at the Sideline Live. We'd love to hear from you. On episode 38, I am delighted to be joined by former Donegal Senior inter-county footballer Luke Keaney. Unfortunately, Luke had to retire at only age 24 from any level of Gaelic football due to injuries and complications in his hips as a result of overtraining and poor load management. Luke takes us through his journey, so I hope you enjoy the episode. Hi Luke, thanks a million for coming on the podcast.
How you doing, Orla? Thanks for having me first off.
Before we get into everything, I suppose, will you be able to give a bit of an elevator pitch to the listeners who might not know who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Luke Keaney from Donegal, a retired 4 Masters and Donegal footballer. Now finding my way in coastal rowing, I suppose. So, you know, had a few setbacks with injuries and just coming on maybe to explain that and hopefully educate a few people.
Brilliant. Yeah, we're going to get into all of this, but I suppose, when did you start your underage career? You would have played with your club, but when did you really get involved in the inter-county scene?
Yeah, well, I was lucky, kind of the 4 Masters club in Donegal town, you know, had great coaches that would have, first of all, allowed me to progress, you know, through the underage ranks. And then I suppose, you know, my mum, she was GAA mad from Galway. And I suppose that kind of instilled in all the children in the family. You know, my sister plays for Donegal and my brother plays soccer at UCD and Sligo Rovers too. But then my younger brother plays for the club, you know, so all of us would have been into the GAA. So we all just went at a young age and then progressed up to the ranks, I suppose. Started getting serious, you know, through development squads and vocational schools football. And then I think the real kind of probably key moment when, you know, you felt it became really serious was the county under 16 squad, which was, it's called Buncrana Cup. So I was lucky enough to captain that, and then it was caught, you know, we won that competition. I was asked into the minors 2008, 2009, you know, so I played 2-year county minor, 3-year 21s then. So, you know, it's just a natural progression then into the senior ranks. You know, so that's kind of the early days, if that's kind of answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I'm interested to hear when you are going into that minor age group, so you're training club minor, you're training county minor, and then would you be involved in the club under 21 maybe?
Yeah, so I suppose when I was, you know, probably most children who are quite talented around 16, 17, you know, I started playing senior football at 16. You know, so I had 2 years with my club at minor, and the same with the county. And then I was, you know, obviously playing 21s and senior with my club. So that was kind of the start, I suppose, of a busy schedule, excuse me. And then we also had the school, vocational schools as well, you know,
okay.
When you were 17, and I would have played like a bit of soccer, but I suppose when I got called into the county minors at 16, I kind of gave up the soccer then and kind of, you know, went all in with the Gaelic.
Okay, very good. And you mentioned it there, under 21s, college football. So talk us through that, because I know you got a scholarship to UCD, and that kind of seems to be where the load really kind of doubled, really.
Yeah, so, well, you know, to be honest, I wasn't the most academic, you know, and I, like any young fella growing up, all I wanted to do was to play football. Mum had to nearly threaten, say if I didn't play, I wasn't going to play football, you know, and I remember playing matches and doing the leaving cert the days after, and, you know, so, like, you know, football is all I kind of knew. So, I ended up getting a scholarship to UCD to do sports and exercise science, and Davy Billings, God rest him, you know, was brilliant, especially to the guys from the country, you know, who had to travel down to UCD and looked after us. And then that was 2000, and I suppose started college 2010. You know, we had Billy Sheehan, who's our freshers manager. You know, we had a very good group of players there, and I suppose that's kind of when, you know, obviously coming out of minor age group, you're coming into, say, the 21 senior setups. So I think that year I was selected. Billy had selected me as the freshers or captain, and at Christmas got called into the Donegal under 21s, who was under Jim McGuinness at the time. And on top of that, this 2011, Jim had also been the manager for the seniors, so I actually played the McKenna Cup there when I was 18. You know, so that was a great experience. You know, I remember we played Tyrone, and it was a few days after Michaela Hart's. You know, her family, and, you know, it was quite an emotional scene. But I remember playing a McKenna Cup game on a frozen pitch in Eden Dark, and there was like 10,000 people, you know,
wow,
support the Hart's family. Like, and I was an 18-year-old run out to Mark Sean Kavanagh, you know, so that, you know, them memories, even though it was quite an emotional day for the circumstances in it, you know, I still, you know, you're a fresher and you're going out there marking some of the best players in the game. You know, it's something that I kind of look back on now, and, you know, even though it was tough at the time, it was still a very exciting part of my life.
Yeah, I'd say so. Just speaking about, you mentioned a couple of names there, kind of making that jump up to under 21 McKenna Cup and senior intercounty football. Was there any like welcome to the big leagues moment?
I do remember. So I used to share, like, Carl Lacey at the time is a, you know, a good friend, a club man. Myself and Carl and Paul Durkin, who would be from Four Masters as well, who'd also would have played for Ballyboden. You know, they're all the guys that would have looked after me when I was coming into the Four Masters team and the county setup. So I remember going over to training one day with the lads and Davy Walsh, and got into the changing room, and I sat down, and again, this is the height of the winter, so you were getting all your layers on, and Colin McFadden came into the changing room and Rory Kavanagh, and I was sitting in the old man's corner.
Oh no.
Picked up my bag and threw it over and says, "Look, this is the end of the young months out into the other changing room." So I go back into the car, and there was a bit of banter from the lads, and I was, you know, a bit embarrassed, but you know, that was one of the rude awakenings, I suppose, when you get into, you know, into the inter-county setup. There's small things out there. It teaches a few lessons.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned there your club teammates and some of the lads on the Donegal squad. What advice were they able to give you kind of coming into the team?
They were brilliant, to be honest. Like, you know, I think Carl and like the club at the time was blessed with some, you know, really good footballers. We'd Shane Carr and Barry Monaghan, who would have played for Donegal for years and captain the county, you know. So when I was nearly 17, you know, even with coming into the Four Masters team, them lads were taking me into the gym in the morning, and, you know, they were instilling the right attitudes and beliefs, and, you know, showing me the kind of ropes of what's needed to be an inter-county footballer, you know, even only a minor, let alone an inter-county. So, you know, I'm kind of very thankful to have them lads there to show me the ropes. And then obviously on game days, just a few words of, you know, just to set, and kind of, you know, even I remember when we played one of the first games, Carl even just gave me my first touch, you know, and that once that happens, it's, you go into your normal routine then. Like, so just having that experience and, you know, a shoulder to lean onto and someone to just protect you was invaluable at the time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Kind of going back then to involving in the load and the training. So you had college under 21, then you had McKenna Cup. Talk us through a little bit of that. When did the issue start with your hip? Was it around that time, or was that just when the training load really increased and it was nearly further down the line?
That's more when the load increased.
Okay.
So like in 2011 at the time, you know, I was still 18. I was still a fresher. I played the McKenna Cup campaign, and then I was into my first year 21s. But I was released then when the National League had started with Donegal, so I went back to my club. Then 2012 was kind of the exact same. I actually played Dublin Championship at the time at UCD. So we got to I think it was the quarter final. We played St. Jude's, Kevin McMenamin's club beat us, I remember. But, you know, even that experience playing with, you know, some high profile players as a fresher, you know, you had John Heslin, Peter Kelly, Mick Fitzsimons, who's from Coola, So even just being in the change room with them and playing in Parnell Park with a couple of thousand on it, was a good experience. And we actually at the time was able to play FBD as well as McKenna Cup.
Oh, brilliant.
So there was a lot going on at the time. But I suppose to go back to your question, it wasn't really until the latter stage, 2012, our club 4 Masters. We played, I think it was 7 games in 28 days in Donegal Championship. So what happened was, with Donegal winning All Ireland, they kind of condensed the championship into a case where it was week on week. And we had played like extra time, and then we had a replay midweek, and then we had another. So I think that stage, even though I was still, 19, 20, the load had greatly increased. You were under maybe, at the time you had your 21s manager, both, senior for your club and county. And then you had, obviously I was playing Sigerson at that stage. So you had 5 or 6 people, looking for a piece of you. I think that's probably when I actually just found it starting to get a bit difficult. But at the same time, you didn't really know what was kind of going on. You just thought it was because of the whole load and training and games, but looking back now and knowing what I do know, it was obviously a red flag. But it's difficult for a 20-year-old to realise that, or, to try and, you're trying to get into the senior team. I played a few challenge games in 2012, and even just being in and around the squad was amazing. So that's what I kind of aspired to for the year after then, You
mentioned there are 7 games in 28 days and you've all these teams. Mentally, did you ever feel like kind of burnt out from it all, or were you just loving football?
You're kind of in a bubble, if I'm being honest. And it's just the way I kind of broke it down. It was just, you just took it one game at a time. But again, at that stage, there was probably a lack of education. There was probably an awareness of what you're actually doing. I think because it was just so condensed, and because you were part of a good setup with the club, you were just, you were just getting ready for the next challenge. And it wasn't really probably to that year after, when it was after that championship had finished, we got beaten we got beaten extra time, I think was at the time. And then a month later, you were called into the senior team, and that was at that stage, I was 20, went straight into the club campaign, into the inter-county, getting ready for 21s. And then I got called into the senior team, and then you had UCD as well. So, that I suppose that October to February was absolutely mental. And it was just, that's probably, I suppose, you're in your third year of county 21s. You were then in with the senior team. I remember we played Ulster final on the Wednesday night, and I got called in the Sunday or the week before to play for Donegal against Dublin in the league game. And that game there I think there was like 18,000 in Balbuffet, because whoever we needed to win, and we drew. And I think if that actually relegated us to Division 2 that in 2013. But that was my first game, and I remember there was a massive fight at half time, and I was at the man mark Dermot Conley, and small things that there, stick out. But at the same time, you only could ask for a better debut, even if you did have an Ulster final on the Wednesday night.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And at that time as well, you're speaking about October to February, you've all these teams, but as well, and as someone from Dublin, I don't realise the travel that you're doing, because you're going from UCD to Donegal multiple times a week.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of people from, especially I couldn't pick a further place to travel, maybe if I went to Kerry, but the big thing, for counties, especially on the West Coast, for when you're a student in Dublin, is the 3.5 hour commute, and you were doing that there. And it wasn't a case you're staying up the weekends, that was happening solid for 3 years. And then obviously when it came closer to championship, you're doing midweek trips, and that really kind of, I suppose, when I did get called into the senior team in 2013, like for the last semester, you're up and down, and the same, that's the year following year, like it's that, that time where people just get home and get to their bed, you're getting into a car, cramped in. I was UCD and especially down the south side, most of the boys were north side to 2 or 3 o'clock, like, and again, that was affecting my recovery. It was affecting, the repair, and that there definitely would have had an impact on my hips,
And was that the point then you realised, well, you didn't, like, you started to know, right, there's actually, I'm having a little bit of trouble here, more than usual?
Yeah, again, like you were kind of managing it, didn't really understand what was actually going on. And, 2000 and like that year, then you were back at the club championship. 2013, you had final year with your UCD and then Dublin championship again. And then I suppose I was offered a scholarship then to Jordanstown to do a master's. So then I was, you were straight back into that campaign after the club had started. And it wasn't really, I suppose, after all that did you actually realise it. But I do remember it was that, I suppose, September I started in Belfast. And, we got beaten pretty comprehensively by Mayo in Croke Park in 2013, and I suppose there was a lot of hard questions asked of what was needed, to do to get back to the top of the table. As a group, we kind of committed to give it everything we had in 2014. Jim had stated it was his final year, and we fully believed we were going to win the All Ireland that year. We were going to do whatever it took. And I suppose any sort of issues that you had going, like all you want to do was get on in that team. I really played a whole lot in 2013, a few league games, but I hadn't really seen too much of football. So my whole ambition was to get into the match day, or into the starting 15. So I was just going to do whatever it took. But them double sessions, in the pre-season, stage of that season, 2014. Looking back now, like knowing how sore I was and not being fit to walk and getting out of the car, you knew you were doing damage, but I didn't really know what I actually was doing to my hips, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You're kind of, as you mentioned earlier, in a bubble. All you're doing is you want to get into starting 15 for Donegal, and you're doing double sessions because you are going for the All Ireland. So, and if you're not, as you said before, if you're not training, you're nobody, so you need to be there.
Yeah, and like you're just managing pain, and you weren't really getting to it, and that's at the end of the day, you're doing your dry needling, your deep tissue work, but at the same time, you weren't addressing the actual problem, and again, that's, with the knowledge you have now, looking back, that's probably one of the biggest regrets. But at the same time, you're 21, you're trying to get into, into plans for the league, the Ulster. So it was just making sure you were on the pitch. And like, it's very hard looking back to do anything different. You know what you know now. You could have done things differently, but at that stage, you were going from session to session.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm interested here, you mentioned pain there and stuff, like when you're going through those really tough sessions, regardless of the pain you're getting, what gets you through those double sessions, those runs where you is it just that dream of playing intercounty football?
Oh, totally. Like it's when I suppose that's going back to when you were a kid and you were watching, them lads I mentioned, the Shane Carrs, the Barry Monaghan's, like Joyce McMullen, like I have family from Galway. I used to remember watching Derek Savage and Michael Donlan and these guys. Like that's just your dream when you're growing up, But I think it was also the group and the bond that was there with that Donegal panel. And I know I wasn't there in 2012, but 2013 or 14, it was such a special group, and everyone just buying in and we're carrying each other, and you know, there was such a high level expected of you that if you kind of just knew that's what was needed, and that was the minimum standard to get to the top, you know. And I think it was just mentally, we just gave everything our body could in that year, you know, and at the end of the day, like, we came up short by a bit of bad luck and different things, but at the same time, you know, it nearly won us another All-Ireland, like.
Yeah, exactly. And just talk us through that schedule there, kind of around that year 2014. What's that weekly schedule? Because you would have been still playing college football as well.
Yeah, so that's like pretty much it's. I was in Jordanstown doing my masters, so we had pretty hectic schedule there. I was on scholarship, so I was under pressure to perform. So I had to play McKenna Cup for Jordanstown and played a game for Donegal, and then we got to the second final that year. Got beat by a last minute point to Cork, you know, and I felt I was playing well. I played a few league games. We then had a training camp out in Portugal. So when I came back from that, I started the league final, you know, so I was happy enough in terms of where the season was at, you know, but at the same time, looking back, I was probably only going to 70% because, you know, I didn't have a range of motion. I was in my right hip especially, you know, but at the same time, you were still performing and you were still getting a job done. And then played against Derry and Antrim in the Ulster Championship, and then I kind of knew after we played Armagh in the quarterfinal, I hadn't featured in that, so it was a big ask then when you were going into a semi-final, you know, to get game time. But again, we were still, you know, we had training camps and you were still training, you know. Then obviously beating the Dubs in that match, you know, we kind of knew we weren't too far away going into the All-Ireland final. And look, I think, you know, there was a few mistakes made that day, but then, you know, Colin McFadden hit the post, you know, and you're 2 inches away from winning All-Ireland. So everything we did that year, you know, it nearly was worth it. Like,
yeah, I know what you mean. You mentioned there, I think I had a quote from a news article. I had no external rotation in my right hip, and my internal rotation was very poor. I couldn't open the hip joint out. I couldn't kick with the inside of my foot.
Yeah.
Your running was off. You couldn't walk. You couldn't put your socks on. Like you were saying, you were there at 70%.
Yeah, that quote was more, I think, after the season had finished, and then
okay.
You know, but to be honest, that's how it was after sessions. You know, like struggling to, like, I remember at the time in Jordanstown, my roommate was looking at me and I could barely climb up the stairs.
Yeah.
Oh, and like knowing that now, that isn't right. Like, you shouldn't be a 21-year-old who's meant to be in the best shape possible and not be fit to walk after a session. You know, so straight away, looking back, there's massive red flags there, like, you know.
Yeah, but look, hindsight is a great thing. But you did step away from the panel. You went travelling. When you escape out of that bubble and you look back, is it an obsession being an inter-county footballer? Is that like you were saying, you put your whole life on hold for that 2014 season? Yeah,
I would call it more like an addiction, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
I know that's a strong word, but to be at the elite level or be at the best, you know, in any sport, you have to want it, you know, 100%. It's black or white, it's all in. You know, that's the way I view it anyway. You know, and maybe that's a bit extreme for some people. But if you're going to put your life on hold to try and win a medal, you know, an Ulster medal or a league or an All-Ireland, you know, that's the minimum that's expected of the group. And that's the point I would take in it. I suppose I was at that stage where, you know, I'd finished college. I didn't know where my next step was in life. You know, two of my friends were heading to Dallas. They actually went out in January 2015, Aaron and James. And at the time, we had our trip to Dubai with the county team it was kind of the reward of getting to the final. So I had to delay my trip, and then I actually went at the start of March then. So it to be honest, we went to Dallas on a year visa, but it was more just to kind of to see what was out there. Like, it wasn't a year of kind of say traveling and going and say playing football or kind of enjoying myself. It was more from a kind of work standpoint to try new areas, see what was out there to kind of further my career.
Yeah.
And I'm blessed that the company that I ended up working for in Dallas, I now working for them now for the last number of years. Like, we set up the Irish side of the company here, and been managing that for the last 3 years. So like, it was from my career standpoint, it was a massive learning, and the contacts I made and the friends over there are people who I see each year and have kind of stood to me at this stage.
Yeah, you spent a year there, was it a full year?
Yeah, well, just short. Like, I was back just before Christmas.
Okay.
Visa had stayed, had kind of expired, and at the same time I kind of had plans. Rory Gallagher was the manager, and I was trying to get back into the team, and I've been in contact with him. So I kind of knew I could take the job back to Ireland with me.
Okay.
And get ready for the next stage. But like, I suppose from being away from the whole inter-county bubble and club bubble, it was a massive break, and it was refreshing, 10 months just to not to have that worry of training. You were able to experience it. You weren't worrying about, say, the small, like, say, your recovery, what your diet, the training, gym work, testing. You were able to kind of let your hair down, and I played a bit of AFL when I was out there, and I got to see parts of the States and go to NFL games and basketball and just see a different side of the world that you wouldn't have if you were still in Donegal.
Yeah, exactly. It's a mad world out there. Some of the NBA games, they're like shows, aren't they?
Oh, it's like
It's class.
yeah. Even like, we went to a few Cowboys and college games, like, and just even
Oh, deadly.
tailgating and go
Yeah.
to like if you see the size of the Cowboy Stadium, it's just incredible. Like, and just the atmosphere, like, you're there for the whole day, like, and
Yeah.
it's good. I laugh, and there's not too many Donegal people, so your accent stands out. So there's a good I laugh with the Texans.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you came back then afterwards, and as you said, you got a call from Rory Gallagher. The interest was there from him to bring you in and for you to go back playing. But at the time you decided to get your hips looked at. Talk us through that process there.
Yeah, so I would have known, obviously, Rory very well. Like, I used to actually travel up with him in 2013, when he was there with Jim. And he had tried to persuade me to stay on before I went to Texas, but I think that year out, even though it gave me a year to rest my body, I still had known that, I was in a lot of discomfort from even playing a bit of Aussie rules out there. I was sore for 2 or 3 days after. But anyway, when I came back, I knew that there was something wasn't right, and I had said it to Tommy Gallagher, who was the physio in Donegal, who had done all my rehab, and someone who I've known since I've been 15. That I was having a lot of issues with both hips, and I suppose when I got into the team, we did we do our fitness testing, and at that stage, I kind of had mentioned it to Rory that I needed to get this looked at, because I knew something wasn't right and hadn't been right for the last number of years. So, like, if I hadn't gone to Dallas, I probably would have had that, had that visit to Damien Griffin in Coventry a year sooner.
Okay.
Because there was no way I would have got a pre-season, let alone a full inter-county season under my belt. So I suppose it was just simple. You got your MRI, and then I had to do a bit of research and speak to a few people, but everything took me to Coventry, and went over with Damien just before Christmas to get a few more. He'd do an MRI test and an X-ray and CAT scan just to see what the damage was, and I suppose that's where the serious event started.
Okay. And did he examine your hips before the scans, or did he just say, come over with the scans and we'll chat then?
No, well, with Tommy Gallagher, see, in 2000, I suppose in 2000 and at the end of 2015, 16, Tommy had done all that, examinational work. And
Okay.
I suppose when I had my MRI results and speaking to the county doctor at the time, they knew I was in big trouble, but they couldn't actually make that call, that I had to see a specialist to kind of make sure, but they knew from just the rotation in my joints, the pain, the lack of mobility, the fact I couldn't run or walk, like I was actually physically carrying my leg, my leg was dragging, my family would even notice that. So
Yeah.
like all them things were adding up in my head. But again, I suppose the addiction that I talked about there earlier, all I want to do is get fixed and get back playing. And I was like, look, no matter what happens, I have 3 months now to the league start. So let's get this issue corrected. And in my head, it was a simple, maybe clean out, maybe a small bit of repair work. And, maybe if worst case scenario, a bit of shaving off the bone.
Okay.
But I was very wrong. So
Yeah.
yeah.
What was that conversation like with the first conversation after he had seen you and kind of said, look, Luke, we're going to be at this for probably a long time?
Well, the first time I went over, you were going over in that mindset, right? I'm going to get back playing. But it was then after when I had a few other MRIs and CAT scans, and they actually inject ink into your joint to show the damage. It was frightening because, you're there in that mindset, but then he's dropping a bomb to say, right, this is actually the condition of your hips, and they resemble the 75-year-old man, and visually, it's when you see it and you actually see the 3D image of your joint and you can see how badly it's eroded. You can see the damage that's done. There's no cartilage there. Your heart sinks and you just get emotional because you're just asking, why is this happening to me and how could it be at this state? But I was in total disbelief, and I was on my own at the time. So, he was like, look, this is, he kind of had said there was bad news, but he couldn't confirm until he actually opened me up, and it's like, I never forget the way he summarizes, like, you open up a car bonnet to see the engine, like that's the exact same. You open up the hip joint to see what's actually inside it. You can't, you can't, like the 3D imaging and the MRIs give its own story, but at the same time, I was leaving there with bad news.
Yeah.
Home,
Yeah, exactly. And so you went back over, they had scans, they did the keyhole surgery. Was that the kind of initial, what he looked at then? After the scans, obviously.
So yeah, so that was before Christmas, and at the end of 16, and then at the start of 17, it's called it's pretty much it's an injection that they put into both your joints, and then they knock you out, and then they examine you under X-ray. So you can imagine it was probably one of the most painful things that happened over like the whole 2 years. Was you can imagine just being knocked out and putting your hips in the positions that they shouldn't be in. So when the pain relief came off, I was in a bad enough way. But it wasn't, I suppose, until I got the right hip. I was penciled in at the start of February to get keyhole done on that. And that was really when, everything kind of came tumbling down, because he went in there to clean it out. The labrum was torn, and he was hoping that it wasn't as bad as previously, had previously shown.
Okay.
That surgery normally takes, a couple of hours. He had to, close me up after 45. And that was really the hardest part, because that's when I was 100% sure that, right, this was past the stage of repair, and I went from being able to play to a quality of life, scenario where, that was the conversation he had to have, was like, right, you need to start thinking about, you know, what your life's going to be like when you're in your 70s with your grandchildren, you know, and that was very difficult to process. You know, you're sitting in a room, you were hoping to be back playing that year, and you've been told you have to start thinking about the future and, you know, being able to walk pain-free and not being in a wheelchair in your 60s. So that there was just gut-wrenching and something I'll never forget, you know.
Yeah, I can imagine the psychological impact that's had. And out of interest, kind of from what you know now, and you kind of said it, you mentioned it's kind of beyond the last stage of repair. What was that last stage? Do you know at what point you could have maybe, as you said, managed your load, maybe gotten something small done to prevent you having to retire?
Great question. Like, the thing was very hard to pinpoint that, because I suppose I had, like, after that there, I had to look at, right, you know, just getting back to normal level of fitness. So, like, to pinpoint that, because then my left hip I was having issues with that, and then that had to be fixed.
Okay.
At the time, you know, from say February to June, when I got my next operation, like them months is where, you know, Damien Griffin, he would have kind of spoken to other surgeons, because he literally had to make a call, you know, to say my career was over then, you know.
Okay.
And that was, I suppose, that stage, I was just sitting there in disbelief, because I wasn't really unsure what was the next step. You know, at the time, there was no other athlete that had got a hip resurfacing and got back playing. You know, so I was there, like, just my world had come crashing down. I was trying to figure out what was next for me, let alone trying to process what I could have done. So then after all that, I had to mentally get prepared for getting the resurfacing.
Yeah.
So for people that don't know that, it's a form of a hip replacement, where instead of, you know, a normal hip replacement, they cut out, you know, your femur and the actual ball and socket, and then replace it with an actual artificial joint. The metal on metal resurfacing is they actually reshape it, and then they put, like, say, a metal cap on the ball part, and then the same goes on to the socket. So what you actually have is you actually have a ball and socket. It's still your bone, but the actual joint is metal. So you can imagine, like, they just cut down the side of your leg and open it up like a butterfly.
Yeah.
So I then had to, like, I suppose, start mentally getting prepared for that, and get ready for being, you know, non-weight bearing for, you know, 7 to 8 weeks on crutches.
Yeah.
There was that whole process, like, was the next thing that I had to actually figure out, you know. And then even after that, I then had to then get my left hip done, you know.
I can't imagine having to go through the right, and then knowing that through that whole process of going through the right, I'm going to have to get my left one done as well.
Yeah, to be honest, like, I'm looking back now, I was in such a kind of low point and in a dark place after the resurfacing that I didn't really care about my left hip. I know that's terrible to say, but, like, I was just battling, like, and accepting that, you know, my inter-county career was over. I was never going to play for Donegal, but then B, my whole Four Masters career was over, you know, and I was never going to get to play with my friends, you know. And then on top of all that there, you then have to look at, you know, you just actual rehab side of it. And, you know, like, I was on very strong medication, you know, and pain relief for that. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of people could do, you know. Like, after the 8 weeks, I had to, you know, like, I was on my own to kind of get out of this hole or this dark place, because, you know, your family, they have to get on their lives, you know, your physio, the surgeon, your friends, they all to get on. And I suppose when you do hit rock bottom and you realize that that's the only way to come up, and I had to do that myself. And, like, I know it sounds that it was an easy, like, now talking about it, but, like, there was many days where I was crying, and, you know, there was a lot of, you know, hard thoughts and a lot of alone time to process everything. But like everything in life, you know, you get on with it, and it's just another hurdle to overcome. And I suppose I'm thankful that, you know, like my mum, she had to battle breast cancer, and just seeing her get over her obstacle, you know, compared to people who battle serious illness, you know, my injury wasn't that, you know, life-threatening, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand completely. Well, you really went through a lot that time. I took a quote from another article. You spoke about your rehab. Your alarm used to go off to go to bed for 10 o'clock at night. You get 10 hours sleep, up in the morning, rehab, maybe a bit of TV and do the rehab and then eat. Like, that just sounds literally like monotonous, where you're, and especially like and I play GAA as well, so you're used to a team environment. Being on your own going through rehab, I'd say that was also very difficult. Just even
Yeah,
motivation wise, it was just
yeah. The way I kind of processed it was I broke it down, you know,
okay.
and I kind of just break the day down to small tasks, you know. And you talk to anyone who's gone through, you know, a long-term injury, you know. But I suppose the way I kind of looked at was, knowing that I was getting my left hip done later that year, I had to just get my right hip to a level that would allow my left one to be operated on.
Okay.
So the way we kind of broke it down with the surgeon and my physio, Tommy, was that right? It was just to get back actually walking on my right side, and then the plan then was to actually rehab both hips together. So I
Okay.
imagine I got, say, my right hip back to say 60%, and then got my left hip operated on, you know, in October that year in 2017. So I then rehab both of them then together, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
with the resurfacing, you just once I got the actual fracture of the hip joint healed, it then, you know, was just breaking it down into small tasks. But look, you had to rewalk again, and you had to figure out, how to build up that whole side of your body, because, you know, I have a few videos and I'm like Bambi on ice when I'm trying to walk. Kind of funny looking back, like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I know what you mean. And during that time when you kind of, as you hit rock bottom and the only way is up from there.
Mm-hmm.
After that time, how do you focus on the positives and kind of limit those negative thoughts of, you know, what could have been, or, you know, I should be playing football? How did you really stay positive and stay focused? Because the rehab in itself sounded like a full-time job.
I'm still battling them, Orla, to be honest. Like, it's
Okay.
not something that you just, you know, takes time. Yeah, like a grieving process, but like it's still, like, I still go to Donegal games and still go to Four Masters games, and I'm watching in, and I still be questioning why I couldn't be out there, or if I was, where I'd be playing, or what I could contribute. And that's just human nature, you know. Like, I'm living with two Donegal lads, you know, and I still be chatting to them about the games and, you know, play cards, and still some of my best friends. But, you know, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I was jealous. You know, like my sister, she's still playing for Donegal, and as much as I go and watch her play and I want the best, there's part of me resents the fact that she's able to do that, or, you know, Jack playing for UCD, or David playing for Four Masters, you know. So that's something that I battle with, you know, daily, or, you know, every so often. But I suppose at the time when I did hit rock bottom, I would have got a good bit of counselling with the GPA, and just speaking to someone, because like, as I said, the family were around you, but, you know, I was very angry. I was very frustrated, and I would have taken a lot of that out on them at the time. You know, it was quite a hard place, because Jack and David were doing their leaving cert and junior cert. Kate actually was coming back from her cruciate, and then I had to move home because I needed full-time help, you know, like, and I had to leave my apartment. And that's something that people don't forget and see, is that the strain that has on the family, you know, and how difficult that can be. And, you know, I wasn't in a good place, and I was a nice person to be around. And, you know, my emotion probably got the better of me many a times, you know, but we're all stronger because of that. But the way I overcome it, I started that rehab page, which was a massive learning tool, and I kind of got the idea when I was in for my second operation, I was just lying in the room before I was getting the operation. I couldn't really sleep from nerves and just kind of fear. But a guy called Matt Tumo, he's an Australian rugby player. He was at Leicester Tigers, and he had his knee reconstructed, and he just doing it. So I actually reached out to him, and then I sent him just a message, and he got back to me straight away, and it was unreal. And I had a few conversations with him over and back, just talking about actually like more the mental side of the rehab, and he battled with that, and just small things like keeping a daily entry, in a diary, and I kind of set up the rehab page just because there wasn't anything out there for anyone who's going through this injury, and then also just actually for myself to document it. So visually, like each day, I try to put in a small entry, and then all of a sudden I just started tracking it, and I never really kind of thought it'd be a place that people would come to, and thankfully it's educated people, but also I've been able to share my experiences to help people, and like there's been a good few people, say like Andy Murray, Sean O'Brien, Jack McGrath. Jack and Sean I would have spoken to. They've got the same operation, the same surgeon. Two of them are back playing, and going back to that, part of me is kind of jealous that they're professional, and that an amateur athlete that at the time, if I was playing, say rugby or soccer, that I could have tried it. But, life's sometimes about what ifs and different things like that,
Yeah, I'm interested to hear that you reached out to the rugby player. I think when you go through something traumatic and huge like that, and I spoke to you before the podcast about my own journey with my own injury, I reached out to someone recently, and I've never met him before, but we have a connection there that even if I never meet him, I know I can reach out, and he understands me to an extent, because we're obviously different people, but you have this understanding of one another about your injury.
Totally. And like people who suffer long-term injuries, you'll always have a connection, because until you actually suffer and have to go through that hardship and that heartache and the tedious hours, the small details, down to like just how monotonous your rehab might be, but to do that every single day, that takes discipline, that takes hard work, and people don't understand that. And you have that as one aspect, but then you have the mental side to balance, and you have that eating away at you, and it one of the ways that I managed was, kind of keeping myself busy, and that was by either reading, or watching documentaries. Now I did complete Netflix for people that are, I was there reading the whole time, because you do have a lot of time. The other aspect is like, I suppose I went from 3 operations, bang, bang, bang. So that whole year was completely read off. The only thing I did, I went away, traveling to Bali with 3 lads from college, and it just happened to be they were 3 professional athletes because everyone else was working, but even just chatting to them, and like even just we were doing some gym sessions over there, here's me trying to battle, what I didn't even know where my life was going. I just knew the thing that I wanted was taken away from me.
Yeah.
Lads were getting ready for another pre-season, so it's just like it's I suppose it's part of the crazy world that we live in, and you don't know what's around the corner. And the way I kind of just took it was, right, this has happened for a reason, and hopefully something around the corner will happen to make a positive impact.
Totally, yeah. You mentioned with the page, I think Seamus Coleman reached out to you and sent you a lovely message. I had similar aspects, people reaching out to me, and those little text messages of I hope you're doing well. It doesn't have to be anything long, just the impact of that is huge, I found anyway.
Yeah, and everyone knows Shamey from being the Donegal captain at Dyer. You can be the Donegal captain.
Yeah. Did you see him do a little pick up at the Euros?
Yeah. He I would have known Shamey just kind of from, he's a massive Killybegs man, and, he'd always been around Donegal town, and would have a lot of friends in common. But it was just more the fact, he'd gone through a pretty serious injury, and just it was more just the rawness and the purity of the man, that he took time, he didn't, like, no one told him to do it. He just took it upon himself to just send a nice message, and them small acts of kindness, that there was when I was at probably at one of my lowest points. I was in my apartment on my own, and then, your whole identity, everything that you wanted in life was taken from you, and you didn't know what was happening next, or, at the time I wasn't working, and it was a tough moment, but just something like that there, it just made me smile, and it gave me that boost. And, then, like, it just kind of inspired me to kick on then,
Absolutely. You spoke about there educating and helping people, especially through your page and through chatting with players or teams. What advice should young people ignore surrounding sport, or really anything in terms of the injury?
I suppose, like from my point of view, like, it's very difficult, because I suppose there were so many different aspects to my injury. Mine's happened from wear and tear. It's something that was, built over time. It wasn't a leg break or a cruciate or something like that there that's abrupt. So it's difficult, but I think a lot of that is down to just the players just need to be better educated, and they need to understand how to look after their bodies, to do all the small things, the rehab, the mobility, the diet, the sleep, all them small things, they all add up. I think it's surround yourself with the right people. I think a lot of that's down to your attitude and your upbringing, and your friends and family that can advise you on that. Like, I was lucky to have a good group around me, but some people aren't as lucky. So I think it's just, if you are having a rough or a difficult time, look who's around you and what advice you're getting, and maybe trying to just to hone in on people that you trust and kind of can guide you correctly, because a lot of people have a lot to say, but it's not always the correct stuff.
Yeah, totally. I want to ask as well, to get your take on this. Are we too focused on the short term in GAA? And I'm referencing that in comparison to the likes of, if you look over maybe to the UK with the soccer, we just seem with GAA, we just seem to have this really like one season mentality that I just don't really understand. But I'd love to get your take on it.
It's a brilliant question. I think there's so many different aspects of the GAA that are good, but then there's some parts that are, that are quite wrong. And the way I kind of would sum it up is, when I was, say, 18 to 21, 22, I had 5 or 6 people, pulling at me. Where, say, Jack, my younger brother, he was Sligo Rovers at the time. When he was 18, he had one manager, and when I had spoken to Professor Griffin, and I'd asked him why isn't this happening to younger sports athletes? Why is it just, like, he'd spoken to different GA people that had gone over it, it just wasn't my case. And he just said, and like, this guy's spoken, he's one of the top surgeons in the world. He's spoken to at conferences all around, from Barcelona to Qatar. He's guys flying in from Australia to the States. But the one thing that he said about the GAA is that our young athletes, we overload them. And instead of making their lives a lot easier, we put more focus on playing more games for more teams when it should be less, and that was the biggest thing, and the biggest, bit of information that I've taken when I've spoken to other players. And, you look at, say, I know it's a bit different because it's professional, but like, if we can protect them, and a lot of it's down to, the hierarchy and the powers to be about how it's structured, and, I do believe we need a clear off season. I do believe we need to better educate, the people that are over these young athletes, and we hold them responsible, because at the end of the day, managers are being, ratified to win games, and it's a pressure environment. And if they don't do it, so then they're putting the pressure back down on the players. You ask a 17 to 21-year-old, they can't say no. They're going to do whatever it takes. And if the wrong manager or the wrong person is leading them, then the person that's going to suffer is the player at the end of the day, and until the GAA have a standard of care, I know they say there's one, but like at the same time, there's people that are over young athletes and they're not properly educated, and I think that's just the minimum that's needed, is that you have, especially at inter-county level, and hopefully get down to clubs, that we have people that are, know what they're doing, understand load, understand basic strength and conditioning, understand how to structure a training session. I think that's where we need to invest our money and our time and effort, because you can until that happens, no matter how many managers are over them, they're still going to be there, and they're still going to be based on the results, and that's it's very hard to take that away. That's just the way that the GAA is, and until there's actually a levy or an actual baseline standard to say, right, you can't work unless you have these qualifications. And the other thing I think that needs to be is just like, it's something that it's going to be very difficult, but like how many games like the person plays in the week and the training sessions they do, until that's better monitored and there's better communication, because I suffered because of that. And if anything comes of me telling my story and educating people, I don't want anyone to go through what I had to go through. So that's kind of me, educating people and explaining what happened to me. If that helps one or two boys or girls, I'm doing something positive in that,
Absolutely. You mentioned it there, and you mentioned it previously, but when you do have talent, I think particularly in the GAA, everyone's pulling on you. It's the club manager, it's your county, it's your college, it's everybody. And as you say, until the GAA really do something about that, I don't know. Like, obviously, someone listening to this hopefully will take something from it, but overall, I think it will take the organisation to really put a hand to really get some sort of control on this, because I know some kids are just, they're being run into the ground and they're 16, 17 years of age.
Yeah, but like this year now, they have put a sports science committee together, and have good people there that have started the process, and I know that's happening in the background. And for me, that's probably 10 years too late for other athletes, and I have to deal with that. I just think the GA have to take better ownership on this, and it has to come from the top down, and then they have to put the power to the county boards and then back into the clubs, because like what makes the GA great is the club scene, it is the community, it is the inter-county game, that whole package. But at the same time, we can't be expecting, our men and women to be role models and to give up so much of their life and not have the basic standards, and unfortunately that was the case for me. And I have to make peace with that. And, God only knows whenever I'll be able to accept that it's completely over. But I suppose time's a good healer.
Yeah. If you could broadcast a message then to any GAA player, coach, parent, mentor, anyone in until the organisation has that process done, what would it be?
How long do you got? I think just it's very difficult for each level, because you have a different message for club managers, you have a different message for seniors, inter-county, underage. I think just just looking out and speaking to the player, and actually understanding that, because it's very difficult to get, if you're a manager, and we've all been in a scenario where we've had managers that we're kind of scared to speak to or understand, but I think that's important, that just to put the player first. I know that's very difficult to say that. I do think, if you are a coach or a manager in a position, that you make sure that you have reached out to people in your local area to get expert advice, especially now coming out of a pandemic, about the training that you're doing, because you think your training could be of a good standard, but you could be actually doing damage to a player because you don't really understand it. I do think, especially the kids that are between 17 to 21, 22 who are competing at a high level, that each year they get, like an NCT, if you want to call it, on their body, or, they get a review done, so that each year you have a baseline and you understand, where you're at from the year before, but again, this all takes time, and, you have to get to the right people, but you need to invest in yourself and make sure, you're doing the best for your own ability.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk a little bit about the rowing. When did you get involved with that, and how's that going for you?
It's going really well, thankfully. I suppose, just being the kind of the person I am, and when one door closed, I needed to fill that void. And I mean that more in a physical sense rather than a mental. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
But I think after my third surgery, and I was coming to terms with with football being finished, I was like, well, what is available, or what can I compete at? So because of the nature of my hips, the surgeon kind of recommended non-weight bearing exercise, so like cycling or rowing, that you could compete in at a high level. Now, like, I'm just short of 6'2" and I'm 90 kg, so cycling was always going to be difficult to compete against that. So in Donegal Town, the local leisure centre, there's a guy there, and a friend called Patrick Brady, who would have been a massive rower in UCD and would have represented Ireland in riverboat. And he's president of the local club in Donegal Town for coastal rowing. So I suppose people who don't know, coastal is kind of like the extreme version of riverboat. It's just got into the Olympics there last year. So it was meant to be at the Paris Games, but because of COVID, they've had to push it back. But, it's pretty much, the boats are out in the sea, going around the course and twisting and turning. And
Wow.
it's very exciting. So I suppose I met him at the start of 2018, and kind of ever since it there now, I've been just training towards it, and thankfully I've been selected to represent Ireland in the World Championships in September. So just training hard for that now.
Amazing. Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's the World Beach Sprint Final. So is that the one out in the ocean with all the mad stuff, is it?
Yeah. So there's two elements. Where myself and Rosie Temple, who's the partner in the boat, we're actually heading to Arklow this weekend to race in the endurance. So there's two Olympians actually in our race.
Wow.
So it's a pretty high standard. And then this is actually a pre-qualifier for the endurance side. So we've been selected, myself and Rosie, for the beach sprints, which is kind of, it's like 500 meters, and you have to run up the beach and run into the boat, and then go around the course, and then jump out and run back up.
Wow.
And yeah, it's very exciting. Like, that's the one that's going to be at the Olympics. And then there's the endurance, which is kind of the exact same style, except it's over a 6 kilometer course. So you can have two elements to that. So because obviously the Olympics were on, the guys who were there have a chance now this weekend to try and qualify. So it'll be exciting, and look, we're training hard, and it's kind of cool that I never knew what rowing was. Not knew, I knew what rowing was, but I never been in a boat. Now 2 years like with proper training, you know, you get to represent your country. So it's cool that you know, it just shows kind of that when you put your head down and work for something, you know, you get your just rewards.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty cool. I want to ask you, speaking about that, you mentioned there you only took up the rowing, and throughout your football career and your injury, and you're now educating people on kind of training load and just educating your story really. What's your definition of success?
I don't like I don't really know. Like I think it's more on the actual individual and their own story, than actually defining success. Because success to some people, you know, you look at the Olympics, there's medals and it's, you know, it's PBs. You know, success for me was a Sam Maguire, or, you know, it was to win a county title for my club. Now my success has changed to where it was just to get back to be healthy and walking, to now trying to compete for you know, titles and rowing. So I think success, it's very hard to define it. You know, I think if for someone it could be just walking to the shop. So I think it's just getting the absolute max out of yourself. And if you get the max out of it and you're happy with it, you know, that happiness is enough, in my views, to be successful.
Brilliant. Looking towards the future, with your hips, I know you're speaking at the FIFA conference next year with the rowing. What are you kind of planning? What can we expect from you over the next little while?
So I been honoured to speak at the FIFA medical conference in Lyon. It was meant to be obviously this year, but had to be put back. So I suppose from just telling my story at the GPA conference 2 years ago now, actually, and I suppose just telling my story, I've been asked to talk at that, so it's kind of cool. There's Stephen Gerrard and Marco van Basten, so it's kind of, they're looking at the players' side of injuries and trying to learn from that. So that's kind of in the pipeline with that. In terms of the rowing, I have to, you know, I'm just kind of looking at the short term. We've this regatta in Arklow, which is the qualifier for the endurance, and then I have another one in Bantry, which is like the national champs, start of September, and then fly out to Portugal for 2 weeks then. So we'll just see where that takes us. You know, did a wee bit of cycling there during lockdown, myself and my mum and two others. There's an ultra race in Donegal called the 555. So just did a bit of training for that there. So I might just do a wee bit more cycling in the off season. But I look at my viewpoint and how I kind of live my life is to just take it day to day, because I suppose, you know, I've learned an awful lot and I've had to overcome, you know, plenty of setbacks. I don't kind of think too far of, you know, into the future. I'll just see, you know, as I said, 2 years ago when I started rowing, I didn't think I'd be representing Ireland. So we'll just see where that takes us.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep up for sure, and I'll be sure to link all your social media below. But I'm going to finish off with the sideline 7. It's the same 7 questions at the end of every podcast. Question 1, what is your favourite quote?
Yeah, I love quotes, by the way. Like, I love looking at sports ones, but there was a brilliant one. If you just give me a second, I had written it down and then it's after.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Do you know what? Go to the next question because I read it down.
Oh yeah,
I can't,
no worries.
No.
No problem. Best sporting event you've been to?
I'm going to break this down into 3 ones because there've been 3 different continents. So obviously Donegal winning All Ireland in 2012 was just an amazing feat, you know, and just to be there and to know so many of the players and to be involved, you know, with some of the lads, it was just an unbelievable experience. And then when I was in Texas, I went to see the All Blacks in Ireland in Chicago. So one of my old roommates in UCD, Josh Landafleer, he literally got a late call up. So I was sitting there with all the players, families, and it was just incredible.
Cool.
You know, it just reminded me of when Donegal won All Ireland, just kind of the buzz. You know, you had people crying and hugging.
Yeah.
And then myself and a guy called Matt O'Hanlon, who's the Wexford hurling captain, we travelled to South America, and I got to see GAA juniors play live. And it was just out of this world. Like, I just remember the actual whole stadium shaking just from the atmosphere. So
Wow.
that was just from an experience of just, you know, being in a different continent. It was unbelievable. Like, Diego Maradona was at the game. It was Tevez's last match, and it was just
Wow.
us, like, you know.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'm lucky to be at a few different ones, you know. And
Yeah.
when I was traveling, I got to go to a few NFL games and basketball, so it was cool too.
Yeah, I'd say so. Overall, we spoke about a lot of the challenges. So you've probably mentioned it already, but biggest setback or challenge so far in your career?
I suppose just dealing with the whole resurfacing. You know, just like dealing with the fact I'll never play football again. You know, dealing with the fact that, you know, my whole identity as a footballer was taken away from me, and battling that, and then also, I suppose, just taking on a new sport and trying to succeed to that. And I think that's the biggest obstacle. You know, but I think learning from and speaking to other people, you know, like my mum had to overcome, you know, serious illness, and just seeing that there, the mental side's just as important, and, you know, and your mindset during them tough times. I think that there's something that I'm kind of very proud of, is how, you know, that resilience and I suppose focus got me over it, and I'm thankful that, you know, moving in the right direction now.
Totally. Kind of on the flip side then.
I got the quote now.
Oh, you have the quote? Oh,
yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So it was I love athlete quotes, but this one is just more kind of a phrase. So it's ability is what you're capable of doing. Motivation determines what you do. Attitude determines how well you do it. So I think it just sums up kind of my personality. It's by Louis Holtz, Holtz. It was one that kind of had written on my whiteboard for a long time. Just something that kind of sums up life, I think.
Brilliant. Kind of on a more positive note then, your biggest achievement, I was going to say on or off the pitch, but now I suppose in and out of the water as well.
Yeah, it's hard. Like I've been blessed. Like, I've won a college all-star. I've won an Ulster title. But I just think the biggest thing is just redefining myself in terms of, you know, finding a new sport, and just, you know, that chapter of the football is now closed. You know, and it's still difficult living in Donegal, because people still identify as a Donegal footballer. You know, you still meet people in matches and they're going, "Oh, how come you're not playing?" Or, you know, I think just that side of just becoming a rower now is something that I'm kind of very proud of.
Brilliant. Advice to your 18-year-old self?
I was very serious, and I kind of would have like overanalyzed games a lot, and, you know, probably didn't focus enough on the positive performances, and kind of just was a bit too critical of my own self, you know. So just to let things go a wee bit easier, you know, if we got beaten or if I hadn't played well, I was very grumpy and angry for a few days. And I think that's something that the more I matured and got older, I dealt with, you know. But I think if I could tell myself something, is just to not to be so harsh on yourself.
Dream dinner guest, and why?
This was a very good question, and there's that many people you'd love to meet, but
you can invite a few. I don't mind. You can open it up to a dinner party.
My grandfather, Tom Dillon, who would have been just a legend growing up. He was kind of my hero. You know, he would have represented Galway, won All Irelands and Railway Cups, and he passed away there 2 years ago. So I think if I had a chance, I definitely get him back for just one dinner, and maybe a Guinness or a glass of red wine with him and laugh, you know. So, you know, I remember like sitting there watching him and the wee footballers coming in, and there was one year, I can't remember, Ollie someone, I can't remember his second name, he came in and he brought back Grandad's All-Ireland winning jersey. And
Wow.
two of them sat there and just talked about, tales about football and about Galway footballers. And I was sitting there, I was about 10 or 11 and just awe, so small things out there like that, that would always kind of reminded me, when he was, Miel Marhurtik, had a saying about Granda. He says Tom Dillon wasn't born, he was quarried. He's hands you've ever seen. So it's just small things like that there, that you'd love to, kind of chat to him about, and that would be my guess, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant guest. And I'm going to finish off with this question: if your life was a book, what chapter would this be called?
I thought of this one, and it's a great question. I just said Uncharted Water.
Okay.
Just kind of with the rowing and not really knowing where or what life can throw at you or what's around the corner. I thought it was just a good way to summarize up everything that's happening now.
Brilliant. Look, Luke, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I'll be sure to leave all your links below, so if anyone listening does want to get in touch, they can do so there. But yeah, just thanks a million, and I just want to wish you the very best of luck with all the rowing.
Thank you very much for having me.
I just want to say a massive thank you to Luke for coming on today and talking us through his journey, the ups and downs, and just being so open and honest about it all. I'll be sure to leave all of his social media links below, so if you did find value in the episode, be sure to reach out to him, and I'd really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts, as it does help the show grow. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.